shocking experience for myself was...
Hello everybody, my name is Melanie Josephine. I am a life coach and I am the author of Rock Your Au Pair Year, which is actually coming out for the second time tomorrow, but depending on when you watch this video, it might already be out. So this is the second version of the first book with a lot more information. But I'm going to talk about this a little bit more by the end of the video because we have a special guest today, my host mom, Pam. I was Pam's au pair over 10 years ago, so it's been a while. And because Pam has been part of the au pair program, or her family's been part of the au pair program for around about 15 years, she has a lot of experience to reflect on. So why don't you introduce yourself, Pam?
All right, my name is Pam McKinney-Peckinpah, and as Melanie said, she was one of our many au pairs. She was a very good au pair, I might add.
Thank you.
I spent 16 years working on Capitol Hill. I was a communications director, press secretary for 2 congressmen and then 3 senators, U.S. senators, and then we adopted our first child. We have 2 boys. They are now 23 and 25, but both boys were adopted from Korea. And after we adopted the boys, I decided that I really needed some help. And we chose the au pair program specifically because of the opportunity for a multicultural exposure for our boys. Our boys were born in Korea. My husband Tim and I are both white, and we knew that, we were starting a mixed racial family. And one of the things that really attracted us to the au pair program was this would be an opportunity for us to have young women from a variety of different countries and backgrounds sharing, at least a year of their life, helping to teach our boys, no matter what country you come from, no matter who you are, that there are so many things in common, so many more things in common that people have than they have differences.
That's an amazing introduction, Pam. you already answered a couple of questions here, because I was about to ask you why you joined the au pair program, but that's amazing. I'm just going to jump into a deeper question, and I would like to see, looking back at all these years in the au pair program, if you were to meet a family that is just joining now, what would be your advice? Or if you would start the whole journey again, what would you do differently?
Well, I was very lucky in that I knew several families that had experience with au pairs. And I got some really terrific advice, and I didn't really understand how terrific that advice was until we got into the program a little bit. But I would say probably first and foremost, understand the country and a little bit about the customs of the country that your potential au pair is coming from. Because one of the things that I found out from experience, I was also warned a little bit about this, but I didn't really understand how important that piece of advice was. You can ask the same question to 5 different young women or men, and you can get the same answer with completely different meaning.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm sure there's actually quite a few au pairs watching, girls and boys who want to become an au pair in the future. What were you looking at in the au pair interview, and what do you think is important for American families when they look for an au pair?
Well, typically driving is very important unless you're looking at a family or the family lives in a large metropolitan area where there is very good transportation, because driving is very important in the United States. And particularly when you get into the suburbs or you get into the smaller communities, they may not have the kind of mass transit system that some of the au pair candidates are used to coming from. So be very upfront about your driving and your driving experience, I would say.
Yes, but in terms of other qualities that families are looking for.
Well, I think punctuality.
Yeah.
Honesty. And the willingness to truly be open and discuss potential problems or situations.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, in my experience, the better of our au pairs were the ones that would come to me right away and say, this happened, I think it might be a problem, or, I'm not happy with the way that, one of your sons is responding to me, so that I could, kind of jump in at the beginning and keep a situation from developing into a problem. But I can't say enough about how important it is to be honest, even about the smallest things, because my philosophy, and I think the philosophy of a lot of American moms and dads, is if you will lie about the little things, then how can I trust you about the big things? Because if there are things like, if the family says that, we prefer a non-smoking au pair, and you smoke, it's better that you say, I smoke, but I won't smoke in your house, or rather than say, no, I don't smoke, and either A, try to quit, which is a difficult thing to do in a stressful situation. Because we had a situation like that, and it was not good. But or kind of sneak around and smoke, because once your host family catches you in a lie, particularly even if it's a lie of no consequence, the first thing that a mom thinks is, oh my gosh, if she's going to lie about smoking, how will I know that she's not, lying about, a situation with my child?
Communication is a big part of my book, and I also write that very good advice is actually to have almost like a set appointment, although you don't have to call it an appointment, like a meeting once a week where you just discuss the week, because some parents may have more time, some parents don't have much time at all, so the au pair might only see them a few minutes every evening. And I know that sometimes you feel like you don't want to occupy someone's time unless it's important, but especially if you are in a situation where your host parents have only limited amounts of time, it's actually very good to have this one time per week. Obviously, if it's an emergency, you need to speak to them immediately, but if it's not an emergency, then you could wait until this time of the week comes up. You just take your notes and then you speak about these things. But it's very true that the more you communicate, the better. I mean, the better your relationship is going to be with the family, and also you won't keep those things to yourself that then become bigger and bigger, and you'll feel more and more uncomfortable to talk about these things the longer you wait, really.
Well, and many families, many American families follow the practice of having a family meeting. Sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month. If the host family has a family meeting, I would certainly ask to be included at least some of the time.
When you reflect on 15 years, which is a very long time, what things would you say you benefited from when it comes to this program? Would you say you're really happy that you joined and you would recommend it? And what were your learnings?
Well, certainly the benefits are, not only immediate, but over time, we have a number of young women, like yourself, from many different countries that are still close with our family and close with my boys, and so we had a number of amazing different young women with lots of different skills and talents that they were able to share with our family. So that was definitely one of the biggest advantages and benefits.
Yeah, and was it the way you expected it to be?
Well, I don't really remember exactly what my expectations were.
Yeah.
With our first au pair.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, just came back and visited us about 4 weeks ago.
Okay.
But I would not change anything in regard to whether or not we had au pairs.
Okay.
I would definitely do that again. Because it really was an enriching experience for our family. And I'm tempted to say we were very lucky to have so many wonderful young women, come and share our lives for a year or 2 years at a time. But, I think, when we look at the overall pool of au pairs, I think many families have, a great number of au pairs that were really fantastic in different ways. Definitely, I see with my boys, they're 25 and 23 now, they enjoy travel. They enjoy meeting people, and when we travel overseas, they like to get involved with the culture of the place that we're visiting. And they enjoy that. They don't find that to be scary. They find it to be an adventure. And I think that's wonderful, because I think the more that people can get together, the easier it is for there to be less conflict in our politics and in our intercountry relationships.
What I would also find very interesting, if you, over the years, if you had learnings for yourself, or maybe even as a whole family, from living with someone from another country, or several different countries, actually.
Well, the biggest shocking experience for myself was how hard I sometimes had to work at communications, because it's communications is what I do for a living, and that's and it always surprised me off and on. I would think that our au pair and myself would be on the same page, and then I would find out, oh, no. What I'm thinking I was saying is not what, you thought you heard.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's cultural.
But it's not actually always culture. I don't know where I read it, but generally speaking, it can be very useful, especially if the information is important, that you say to the person, well, could you just quickly repeat what we've just discussed? Because you might find out that they heard something completely different. I quickly learned that I needed to, either say something like that, or could you explain to me, what I just said to you? What does that mean to you? Yeah.
How do you think you're going forward? And some au pairs would be offended by that. And they would think that, and a few times I would, get a response like, well, I'm not stupid, and so then I have to I'm not really asking because of that. I just, you know.
Well, I think the au pair program is definitely a way of working, on your communication skills, but also generally, how do you bring things across? Because there's a big difference, what words you use, how you bring yourself across, and that can actually be very hard when you are not a fluent speaker.
Yes.
Because you can come across easily harsh, because
well, and not just harsh, but if you're not a fluent speaker, there is always the possibility that a phrase or a word that means something in English means something very different when translated, or even very different in British English.
Yeah.
So,
That kind of leads to my next question. When you were hiring an au pair, how important was the English level? Or where did the English level need to be for you to hire the au pair?
Well, I always put a fairly high priority on our au pairs having good English. And what does good English mean? Well, to me, it means that our au pairs were able to understand most, if not all, of what I was trying to communicate to them. I rather expected that it would take a bit of time. I didn't expect fluency, and I expected that that sometimes there would be a difficulty in formulating the response that you wanted, or that the au pair wanted to convey back. But I think it's really important that au pairs be very upfront with how well they speak English, or if there are any weak areas, then it's much better to go in at the onset knowing that you may need to take a little bit more time in explaining something to your au pair, as opposed to expecting someone to come in with fluent English and then find out that they not only aren't fluent, but have a real difficulty understanding.
Well, that being said, for everybody who's watching who is a bit nervous about their English, I think that if you really try very hard and you work on your English, you shouldn't think just because your English isn't fluent yet, you can't be an au pair, because obviously one of the reasons you want to be an au pair, unless you are already from an English-speaking country, is that you learn the language. So I think it's a lot about just putting yourself out there and having the confidence to say, look, I didn't understand this, because it's better to say, I didn't understand this, could you repeat or rephrase this, rather than you feeling embarrassed and saying that you did understand and then things go wrong. So I think that if you're trying very hard, and different families will look for different English levels. I mean, a family with children who go to school may or may not, depending on their view on this, look for somebody who is like at a fluent level, but family with younger children may be happier for you to
babies,
be. It just depends. Every family is different, but I think it's very important to be honest if you don't understand. And I know it can be frustrating if you have to keep saying you didn't understand. However, this time will go by. I actually want to give just a quick example. Funny enough that it didn't happen here, but when I moved to Australia, in the beginning I had a much more difficult time to understand the very strong Australian accent, and for the first week all I did was say, can you please repeat this? and that was after a year of being here, and I felt really bad for thinking my English level had improved so much, and then yet I go to another country and I understand nothing. I mean, not nothing, but then after a week or maybe 2 weeks, I did start to understand the accent. So just because the first days or weeks are frustrating doesn't mean that you can't overcome this phase. You just have to see it as a phase that you will overcome. I want to talk a little bit about rematch. I know you have been in the situation, but not that many times. But I want to speak about the family side and the au pair side. When do you think it is necessary to make the decision to go forward with a rematch? Because there are situations where you can work things out, and then there are situations where it's better to move on.
Well, we rematched definitely 3 times, possibly 4 times. And we also were in a position where we got au pairs who were in rematch. And so we took rematched au pairs. And I would say overall, in general, it's better to rematch sooner than later. I think you have to give it a good chance. And, at day 3, that's way too soon to say, oh no, I don't like this and this is horrible and it's not what I expected. I think that after 2 weeks, I think that you, as a host mom, have a pretty good idea about whether or not you're going to be able to work things out. One of the things that I would always do is try to check in and say, please be very honest and upfront with me. How do you think things are going? Are there problems or concerns that you have? Are there situations that you would like, to know how to better deal with? And I think I am in favor of, if there's going to be a rematch, and the au pair is unhappy, not more than a month time to give it, a shot to see what's going. And from a family perspective, I think the same. I mean, the only time I would want to rematch sooner is if I felt like the au pair was not giving safe childcare.
I want to talk a little bit about both sides. So rematch can be a mutual decision, but it can also be the decision by the au pair or the decision by the family. And I have come across a couple of girls who, when they did make the decision to rematch, that they were treated completely differently after this conversation and not in a positive way. Are there any thoughts how you can gracefully handle rematch?
Well, rematch is always tricky. I think that it's probably a good idea for an au pair to talk things out with her community counselor and maybe get some advice
on how to have this conversation.
On how to have the conversation. Beyond that, I mean, if I were advising an au pair how to have the conversation, I would emphasize that don't go in with a long laundry list of why I hate your family. You do this and you do this and you're horrible and I don't think that those kind of conversations are never ever productive. The more you can flip it around and say, I really feel like we're not communicating well, or I feel like this is really not the right match for me. And even if in your view the family is horrible, you will gain nothing by a long diatribe about how terrible each and all the family members are.
I just have one more question for you, Pam. And okay, it sounds like it's a final question countdown. No.
Exactly. What's my prize?
No, it's just au pairs in America, have the option to extend 6, 9, or 12 months. Well, 6 or 9 months if within the same family, 12 if changing the family. And I have come across quite a few girls who have had an amazing first year with their family and an amazing relationship, and then they decide to go to another state to have a completely different experience with a different family, but have not had the best experience bringing this across to the current family. So how could they, like, what advice would you give them in terms of how to have this conversation with the current family, trying not to hurt their feelings or bringing across that it's not about them, it's more about the experience?
Well, my recommendation would be to emphasize again, what your goal is as the au pair. So, in other words, if I were an au pair and I were going to a host family that I was not extending with, I would, and you had a very good year, I would be sure and say that up front. I've had a really wonderful year. I really enjoy the family. Be truthful and honest, but, say as many positive things as you can. And, and then, depending upon your situation, you could say something like, this may be the only opportunity I ever have to live in the United States, and I would really like to experience what life is like in a different state. And, or, this doesn't work if you're going to move like 15 miles away, by the way. So you got to be careful. But or if you're like, even if you're moving to another state, like
moving to the next town.
Yeah, in Virginia, in Virginia, we're very close to the District of Columbia or Maryland. That would not work if you were going to Maryland or the District of Columbia because people cross those lines all the time.
Yeah.
But if you were our au pair in Virginia and you wanted to try Washington State or California or Chicago, Illinois, or someplace, in the Midwest, or someplace that is a bit subculturally different. I mean, the United States is big, and I know that sounds silly and everybody says, oh yeah, it's big, but many of our au pairs didn't really realize how big the United States is, and that you can't just, drive to California for the weekend. It's a 4-day drive. So if you're looking to really experience a different part of the country, emphasize that. And, or, emphasize that you really would like to see, the United States through the eyes of a different family. And in a different family situation. And again, make it about yourself. Make it sound like you sort of have a plan or goals, and that will go over much better. Than if you, are just, I want a new family.
I think that's very good advice. First of all, thank you very much for joining me today and answering all these questions openly and honestly. And yes, as mentioned in the very beginning, Pam and I have known each other now for over 10 years and have, we've known each other in completely different phases of our lives. So it's very, very interesting. I try to come back here every year. It's not always possible, but I try to, and it's really lovely to being part of an American family. At the very end of the video, especially for new au pairs or au pairs who have just joined the program and who have not heard of my book Rock Your Au Pair Year, which, by the way, Pam was the editor. This is actually really a combined work. Obviously I am the author, however, quite a few of my friends who are nannies or former au pairs have contributed to this amazing book. And if you are someone who wants to be an au pair in the future, I just want to let you know a little bit about this book. I am taking you on a journey from the very beginning of the process where you think about becoming an au pair and the steps you take towards being an au pair.
Basically, you start out with, how you go about, once you decide, gee, I want to be an au pair, what do I do? And you finish with some really solid advice for au pairs once they've been placed in a host family.
Yes, that's right. And so this book came out 2 years ago. Pam and I have worked on a second edition where I update a couple of the chapters. 2 years is quite a bit of time, so I did get some feedback from other au pairs, people who read the book, and the chapters that have mainly been updated are on being an au pair in the US, because there was a lot of requests on this particular topic, not just any country but the US. So there is more information on being an au pair in the US, and there's also more information about the au pair interview and how you can present yourself better, how not to present yourself, the no-goes, all of that. There's an update on that in the book. There is much more information about rematch and how you can go through this process gracefully, like we talk a little bit about today, but I write more in detail about this topic in the book, and also more information of how you can make the most of your free time while you're here. Yeah, so that being said, I'm going to end the video here. Thank you again, and have a lovely day, and see you in my next video. Bye!